we're told that William the Conqueror spends Christmas in York. And it says he celebrates Christmas in all his regalia, all his kingly regalia, wears the crown and the full cloak and all the thing, and has some sort of ceremony through what must have been the blackened, gutted out, charred remains of York Minster.
Right.
And again, if you can sort of picture that.
Well, that sounds like a phenomenal piece of art.
Right, yeah. What a moment in time.
William in York Minster.
Yeah, the burnt down, gutted remains of it. And again, you can only infer it because we haven't got anything remotely like an insight into his thinking or his psychology. Yeah. But he must have thought, and we know really, that he was like, I'm not having this. This is like the third time in 18 months, I think it is. Third or fourth time in a year, odd, something like that, where he's had to keep going back up north to put down these rebellions that then melt away from him. So, what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, the people who are rebelling are all out there somewhere.
Yeah. You can either... Well, the options are, again, you can do some sort of hearts and minds campaign.
I think it's a bit late for that.
Or you can murder everyone. Everyone. You know, like...
Some of you may be rebels, you know. Some of you might not be.
We talked about, didn't we, last time, how Genghis Khan famously, when he got into China, realised, well, why don't we just genocide every single human in China? It would solve our problem, wouldn't it?
Be good pasture land for the horses.
Yeah. So William decides that he's going to do something like this. I should also mention that the picture here in that year 68, 69 into 70 is even more complicated than I've said. I just want to stress that, because even the way I've described it is a bit of a simplified, boiled down version of events. So there's all sorts goes on in Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury is one of the big centres of rebellion, obviously much more in the south and west. Yeovil, all these places. Yeovil is a big centre of discontent.
One of my nans is from Yeovil.
All right. Yeah, it's just a funny place, isn't it?
Well, it's a quiet place that you don't expect to be a massive centre of military discontent.
Exeter again rises up. The same places. I think I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but I'll say it again, that in the age of William, of Maud and Stephen, Exeter becomes sort of the second main camp. It can become sort of the Argivin stronghold, or Maud's base of operations is Exeter. Again, because of its walls, they're obviously repaired after they may or may not have fallen down when William was there.
Is there any evidence that they got repaired? No.
We get that there are, like I say, it's just incorrect to say the English were just subdued or just rolled over. We're told in the Chronicles and various other accounts, Norman and French ones, that quite often the Englishmen are, quote, wild men. Or quote, untamable Englishmen. There's no shortage of untamable Englishmen around the place.
That's a great description, isn't it?
Yeah.
Untamable Englishmen.
Yeah. Yeah, the second William the Bastard's full army is over the horizon, we're going to start doing stuff. We won't stand up to the army, the King's army, because who can?
Well, that's like, England just rolled over, which is why William had to spend the rest of his life putting down rebellions. That's what people who've rolled over do.
Right, yeah.
It's just nonsense.
Yeah. Because there's everything to play for. It really is. I was going to say slavery. Very, very technically, it's not slavery. But in other senses, if you're going to talk about indentured slavery or wage slavery as a type of slavery, you're reduced to a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
Like all your liberty isn't taken away, but maybe all your property is,
compared to what you had
liberty.
before.
Yeah.
Compared to what it was like under the Anglo-Saxon kings, or even some of the Danish kings. Like, this is way worse.
Yeah, dispossessed illegally by force. And all this marching around Stafford, one of the places, rises up a lot. All this marching about with William putting it down is also causing his own army to be. That's hard on them as well.
Must be very infuriating.
Very hard, and we're told that both sides are, quote, reduced to great wretchedness. William has to sort of whip his army to keep doing as he's asking. Yeah, because they don't want to just endlessly do this. Yeah, and so he can't go on forever because of that. If nothing else, his army won't follow him forever through absolutely anything. And as I mentioned, that winter 69-70 was apparently insanely harsh. You know, sometimes you get that.
Yeah.
Rivers and lakes that don't usually freeze over do.
Mm-hmm.
All that sort of thing. Livestock that doesn't usually freeze to death in the fields does. That kind of thing. For some reason, you know, you get that. So in that winter, he does. It seems like he makes the decision. William the Conqueror does make the decision that he's going to harry the north, and that's where it comes from. And what that really is a policy of scorched earth,
Yes.
Rape and murder, wholesale murder, and scorched earth. Really to turn Yorkshire, roughly what is modern day Yorkshire, into a desert. To clear it out. And so that is what's done. And just like the Battle of Hastings, it leaves sort of even the most pro-Norman accounts either just omit it completely because there's no justifying it, or are sort of harsh with their condemnation. Because it's sort of so again, people look at Doomsday Book and they say, because there's no equivalent of Doomsday Book exactly before, but there are, because Doomsday Book is so thorough. In fact, I was listening to someone just the other day saying that Doomsday Book is Great Doomsday and Little Doomsday and the little satellite books around it are the best, the most in-depth view of an 11th century society we've got in the world, the whole world.
Well, I mean, he literally went through and categorised everything.
There's no equivalent in Japan, anything. Even the most advanced societies in like 11th century China, there's no equivalent of it. So it really is an amazing thing. But what the Anglo-Saxons did do, and I'll talk about Doomsday in a bit more detail, probably a few minutes worth of detail next time. They did have some kind of, census isn't the right word, but they knew roughly what earldoms, how many men were under certain earldoms, and at least in theory, how many castles and things they was, not castles, but how much land and money, very, very roughly, was supposed to be out there. Right. And again, nothing like a modern census, but in Doomsday, so again, 15 odd years, a bit more than 15 odd years later, it looks like around 150,000 people have left or just aren't in Yorkshire anymore.
And no longer showing up in the census.
Right, yeah. 150,000. Now, that doesn't mean all of those were casualties. A lot of them will be effectively refugees that fled south, loads of them.
But a lot of them will have been casualties.
Yeah. We think maybe that the killing and the subsequent famine may be as much as 100,000. And as I mentioned before about the Battle of Hastings, some bits in history are more or less pored over. They've had more or less scholarly work done on them. This, or nearly everything in William's career, the English love their own history, has been gone over in so much detail. Really every tiny little argument that could be made about what this tiny bit of evidence does or doesn't infer. And even the most conservative, it looks like maybe 100,000.
Yeah. This isn't an island. What are they? Something like 2 to 3 million English at this point.
Yes, in that order. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like because you think, well, okay, there's now there's like 45 million, but back then I've seen estimates of like 2 to 3 million Englishmen existing. Just English people exist,
right.
and I've seen upper estimates of 250,000 for the harrying of the North. So that's 10% of the population killed, the entire island.
I have seen estimates as high as that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be conservative, so I don't want to be sensationalist.
We don't know,
because when the lower numbers are incredible, you know.
Yeah, but when you're in the realms of hundreds of thousands of people, when the population is only 2 million, that's genocidal levels. That's genuine horror.
We are told that on his deathbed, whether it's true or not, we are told that on his deathbed, the few weeks when it was clear William was dying and was bedridden, that he just kept giving his testimony and his trying to have his soul wiped clean for the crimes of the harrying of the North, with priest after priest after priest.
Is God going to be angry that I killed 200,000 people? He might be.
I did build an abbey though, so I did refurbish quite a few monasteries. Is that not good enough? I have confessed. I am sorry.
200,000 abbeys then?
I am sorry. You're right, yeah, it's not enough. Yeah, you just can't do enough penance.
Yeah.
So again, at that Christmas, in order to disperse the various armies raged against him, apparently basically bribed the Danes that were in the Humber, sitting in the Humber, and on the Isle of Axholme, just offers them huge amounts of money, and they take it. Now, if they'd stayed
tradition
strong,
at this point.
right? Yeah. If they'd stayed strong, who knows how differently things might have been. But they do decide to take the money and run.
Yeah.
At this point, so he's like, okay, the sort of immediate threat is over, and in the new year, 1070, they basically comb the forests and hills of people. And not just people, all livestock, anything that's food, any foodstuffs, anything. So, well, if I've got a line here from Aldrich Vitalis, who is, just to mention about Aldrich Vitalis, he's writing a little bit after. He was born shortly after this, so they're his dates. Yeah. But he would have known, his parents' generation would have lived through it. So we know he would have lived through the consequences, seen the consequences with his own eyes, and certainly interviewed people that actually lived through it. And he's true Anglo-Norman. He's sort of French, sort of Norman, but identified as English and born and grew up in England.
Right.
So that's his story. But as far as the chronicles go, he's sort of fairly pro-English, or just a bit more honest, really. We know it's not pure pro-Norman propaganda. He wrote this. In his anger, William the Conqueror's anger, he commanded that all crops and herds, chattels and food of every kind should be brought together and burnt to ashes with consuming fire, so that the whole region north of the Humber might be stripped of all means of sustenance. As a consequence, so serious a scarcity was felt in England, and so terrible a famine fell upon the humble and defenceless people, that more than 100,000 Christian folk of both sexes, young and old alike, perished of hunger.
All right, well, that's just the people who die of the famine.
Yeah.
Right. Not say the people that the Normans just killed.
And that is really, a horrific thing. It's easy to read a passage like that.
Well, it's Stalin-esque,
yeah.
isn't it?
But it's the reality of seeing whole families, like when you're as skinny as a skeleton, and you're all just die of starvation on the floor of your hut.
Yeah. I mean, this is
so grim.
That's like the Holodomor. That's Stalin-esque. It's,
yeah.
They can die, can't they?
Distended bellies on little kids.
Yeah.
And people trying to boil up some leather and eat that, or the bark of trees, whatever. Yeah. John of Worcester tells us that, people were reduced to eating horses, cats and dogs, or even human flesh. That's what nearly always happens in mass starvations. You'll eat someone who's recently died. You'll eat them, like there's still a bit of meat on their thigh or something. You can cut that out. It might give you some energy. It's super dark, really horrible, really, really horrible. People, we were told, sell themselves into slavery in order, maybe their slave master can give them meals. Still, that is better than just dying of starvation. There's accounts of, just like at some of the liberated camps in World War II, if you give people that are sort of hours or days away from dying of starvation, if you just give them a full meal, it's really dangerous. They might die.
Yeah.
If your body...
Yeah, you've got to give them small amounts.
Right, you've got to wean them back onto food.
Yeah.
So there's accounts of people in death camps and in this period, they as a refugee, walk into a village and they're given a meal and then they die. They collapse. It's too much for their system.
Yeah.
Just to be given a nice rich meal. So really quite, horror. Scenes of horror. Loads of refugees, again, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of refugees pouring southwards into Mercia and even the southwest of England. Caravans of destitute whole families and things. Some of them dying by the side of the road. It seems really bad. One more line or two, fairly famous from Aldrich Vitalis about it. Says, because this sort of thing is quite rare, because he gives his judgment, and he says, quote, my narrative has frequently had occasion to praise William, but for this act, which condemned the innocent and guilty alike to die of slow starvation, I cannot commend him. For when I think of helpless children, young men in the prime of their life, and hoary old greybeards perishing alike of hunger, I am so moved to pity that I would rather lament the grief and sufferings of the wretched people than make a vain attempt to flatter the perpetrator of such infamy. Moreover, I declare that assuredly such brutal slaughter cannot remain unpunished, for the Almighty Judge watches over high and low alike. He will weigh the deeds of all in an even balance, and as a just avenger will punish wrongdoing, as the eternal law makes clear to all men. End quote. So, in other words, that's the harshest condemnation he could really. That's really, really harsh for an 11th century chronicler to say things like that.
Well, God will take vengeance on you, is what he's saying.
Yeah, in a sense, he's saying you're going to burn in hell for that one.
Yeah.
You're going to burn in hell and deserve it.
But I mean, it does seem absolutely awful. So
I think it's one of those decisions where leaders, you get it all through history, even in sort of the 20th century, where a leader will make a decision maybe they're not even aware of how brutal it was, like Truman's decision to drop the bomb on Nagasaki, largely almost, civilian. Yeah. It's just like, on paper, it's a decision to make.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.